Welcome to a quick guide to sketchnoting. My name's James Williams. I'm a software engineer for Advanced System Group supporting Google Developer Studio. I'd like to describe sketchnoting as creative, opinionated curation of a work into text, icons, and pictures. In creating a sketchnote, you're deciding what elements of the original work to highlight and should stand above others. Beyond that, if there's related information that provides more context to something, you should include it. As some of y'all may know, I used to make programming courses at Udacity, an online education provider. For much of my time there, we used a style that emphasized handwritten text and drawings to make information relatable to students. I wanted a low-cost way to practice my skills for that, so I found sketchnoting. And that's a picture of a Sega Genesis, so my Genesis story, my origin story sort of thing. So here's the very first sketchnote that I ever did. It was based off of a podcast, The Brian Callen Show, where they reviewed a book called Mindset, The New Psychology of Success. And you're going to see psychology come up multiple times in this talk. Fast forward to 2 years later, I got more comfortable with sketchnoting, making courses, drawing, and this is something that I came up with for a talk that we had at work on storytelling. The speaker, Matthew Lunn, is a former Pixar artist and story person. One thing I take away from it compared to my starting point is having more confidence in leaving things out versus essentially transcribing the talk. So just briefly, one of the key points about a storytelling talk is how proper stories have structure, how it all starts with a good hook, and how there's a balance of conflict and action and the expected and unexpected to drive you forward in, engaging with the story. Also, that good stories have characters that change. And this was kind of a fun one that, because we had lots of time to think about it. This was a 2-hour talk. So I just kind of came up with, a sapling into a tree to indicate change. And then for a good story, there's setup, build up, and a payoff. And for this one, I thought that, sort of clearing out land, having scaffolding and having cranes, and then having a full building would sort of give you that transition between the three. So why should you sketchnote? For me, it comes down to tapping into the way that the brain works. So back in 2014, Pam Muller and Daniel Oppenheimer published the paper, "The Pen is Mightier Than the Keyboard: Advantages of Longhand over Laptop Note-Taking," in the journal Psychological Science. After taking notes using one of the methods, either longhand, on paper, or with a laptop, their subjects took assessments that included questions for factual information, such as what is a date that X happened, and conceptual information, such as what would the prognosis be if you had a patient with A, B, and C symptoms. Longhand note takers, where I would group sketchnoters, did better than laptop note takers in almost all categories, with greater margins when they were able to review their notes just before the assessment. Laptop note takers recorded more words on average and more verbatim words, but fared worse. The authors noted, whereas taking more notes can be beneficial, laptop note takers' tendency to transcribe notes verbatim rather than processing information and reframing it in their own words is detrimental to learning. While many of us are far removed from tests, there's probably a session, meeting, or presentation that you could benefit from having better comprehension and recall. 3 things make up a good sketchnote in my opinion. its text, its usage of color, and its usage of images, icons, and drawings. Text forms the backbone of most sketchnotes and gives you a lot of space to express ideas and concepts by varying the size, text color, the specific font, contrast, rotation, all these things. In this slide, we have the word hello written a bunch of times using different typefaces and sizes and such. So for the first exercise that we're going to have you do, I want you to write your ABCs. I know some of you are used to never writing anything on paper, but let's try it. So write the alphabet and numbers a couple of times, well, as much as you can get in a minute's time, and focus on being intentional, especially if you're one of those people that's prone to not be able to read your writing after you've written it. Color is another thing you can use with text to set off content in a sketchnote. You can use as many or as few colors as you want. It also allows you to exploit common conventions that your readers will have to indicate information in a concise way. So for here, we have traffic signal, and we're using the colors to kind of resemble or indicate, red for stop and yellow for sort of warning, slow down, and green for go. So I'm not going to go too much into how to pick a palette, but instead I'm going to surface two resources. One is Adobe Color, and the other is Color Hunt, where you can see palettes that should work together. Now, speaking more in color, so here's a sketch note that uses pretty much a single color for everything, just different tones of the same color. And through the use of varying the size and font and usage of different tones and drawings, Corey has made this be a very dynamic sketch note. On the other end of the spectrum, Lara used the colors that are in the Google logo to indicate different areas of content for the Google I/O 2019 keynote talk. So like Android is green, YouTube stuff is red, and that sort of allowed her to organize things, but also draw from an established brand. So we're going to do another quick little exercise. One of the sites that I use from time to time is Google Quick Draw, which allows you to help train an AI by drawing in. It tries to guess what you have drawn. So head over to the site in another tab and go through a round of drawings. And if you don't want to do that, you can see my very curated round of drawings that I did.
I see ear, or cloud, or peanut, or apple, or rhinoceros. Oh, I know, it's B. I see leg, or square, or book, or picture frame. Oh, I know, it's cell phone. I see line, or string bean, or banana. Oh, I know, it's palm tree. I see circle, or mushroom, or cup, or lipstick. I see marker. Oh, I know, it's candle. I see potato, or mouse, or pillow, or flashlight, or camera. Oh, I know, it's Canon. I see ear, or circle. Oh, I know, it's donut.
So one way to get over a lack of drawing skills and time to actually draw the thing, because remember you're in a session talk or something like that, is to deconstruct it into only what's needed. Change whatever details you need to make it easier to represent, to draw, to color. For this battery and avocado, any of the drawings on the right could represent them, but each has different levels of detail. You may have also noticed that I rotated the battery to avoid having to draw it in perspective. You can also draw people. All you need is a circle, a rectangle, and some extra lines. Logos are another area that you can, expand your sort of toolbox of skills. And the thing with these is a lot of times you don't have to draw these by hand. You can find the logo and trace it or freehand it. Basically, as long as you can get sort of close to what you want to represent, nobody's going to come and tell you, oh, that color's slightly wrong. It should be 2 tones darker or something like that. Containers and dividers are great ways to offset text, take advantage of doing a small amount of things to give you big impact in a sketchnote. You have lots of different options from just simple rectangles to banners to all different types of things. And, sometimes you can just put random shapes together and make a divider or a header, but really dig deep and look for inspiration in sort of everything from just random shapes to historical architecture. Here's an example of how I use containers to structure this sketch note, this 2-page sketch note, like it was a comic strip. So how can you level up your sketch notes? The first way is to take inspiration from infographics. This is a sort of famous, I almost feel like it's a sketch note. So this shows how the Napoleonic army sort of lost soldiers as they marched into Russia and were not prepared for the harsh climate. Basically, it started in June and then it lasted 6 months. And winter in Russia is obviously much colder than winter in France, especially if you're not prepared for it taking until winter. So this type of infographic packs a lot of information in very few words and a couple of diagrams. Another way that you can level up your sketchnoting is borrow from graphic design. So this book, 100 Ideas That Have Changed Graphic Design, is a book I bought a couple years ago, and it has a lot of good ideas for just different things like, how graffiti showed up in print media and then, certain aspects of the 70s and 50s and title sequences and propaganda posters and all these types of things. So this has been sort of an inspiration of little things that I'll just flip through it. It just keeps my mind always looking for different ways to put information together. So lastly, in this sort of level up area, I would say to apply the Gestalt laws of grouping. So Gestalt psychology sort of concerns itself with how individuals sort of perceive patterns or configurations. And if you've ever heard the figure speech, the whole is more than the sum of its parts, that's kind of what Gestaltism sort of centers on. Different sort of phenomenon that or phenomena, I think is the word. Different things that change how you perceive the world around you based on how they come together. And, I'm not going to read out the 6 terms here because I'm going to explain each of them. And where applicable, I'm going to pull some examples from sketchnoting some of my friends as well to sort of show how that makes that sketch note good. So the law of similarity sort of states that if elements are similar upon some sort of across some characteristic, that you will sort of group them together somehow. So in this example from Chuki, each of the titles are underlined. So to me, when I'm looking at the sketch note, I see one title that's underlined in green, and then I see another section, and that tells me, okay, each of these must be some sort of similarity between them. In this case, they're all sort of sections of the talk that John gave. And then to the far right, there are a bunch of sort of bullets that are in yellow and with frowny faces. So that is another sort of law similarity thing that tells me these must be grouped together somehow. So continuation is the impulse to follow lines in established direction over sharp change. I don't really have a good example from Sketchnote world to sort of demonstrate this. So yeah, the law of closure sort of relies on your brain to fill in the gaps in a design of an object. And this is something that we can exploit in drawing because, like that slide I had like 10 slides ago or so of deconstructing a drawing into what is essential. Because as long as you have enough sort of essential lines to sort of guide the viewer to what you're sort of trying to indicate, they're going to read it as that. So the law of proximity is things that are close together are related even if they're different things. So in this sketch note No More Tofu that Miguel gave at Chicago Roboto, I believe. Yep. I have everything in boxes, and for that first row, the year is 1999, and then he talked about where emoji came from. Those things are together, so in English you read from left to right, you're going to read those things as being together, somewhat related, coming in a sequence. So Figureground is where your brain separates figures that are sort of in the foreground from their background, and it can be one way that you do sort of three-dimensional stuff. So in this sketch note from Nitya, I see sort of two examples of Figureground. The first is in the top right, where there's the spaceship that's taking off from a launching pad that's Microsoft, which I love that part about the sketch note. And then sort of at the bottom, there's the caricature sort of portrait deal where she's using different sort of line weights. The last one that I'm going to talk about is simplicity and order, and that's documents how your brain deconstructs complex shapes into what is the most simple version of that shape. So if you see the sort of configuration on the left, most people would read that as the composition of multiple shapes versus being that very complex and weird shape. And this is another one that I don't really have a good example of, but I think that this is sort of something that is a pattern that you can navigate away from and simplify things if it starts to get too complicated that things get confused. So in this talk, I've purposely not talked about tools just because I use a lot of different tools and some of them are expensive, some are not expensive. So I generally like to push people to sort of experiment and use what's good for them. Like, obviously start out with paper, but you might gravitate more towards Copic markers or colored pencils or fountain pens, which I've used on occasion, or iPad or Surface or an Android tablet like the Pixelbook. Like there's lots of things that you can use. Everything has its own benefits and pros and cons. So I I'm going to go more towards resources that I like. So the first one is Verbal to Visual Notebook by Doug Neal. He also has a YouTube channel called Verbal to Visual. The second is the Sketchnote Handbook by Mike Rohde. He works as a designer, so his sketch notes in the book is, I have to say, kind of intimidating. So yeah, just be aware that because he's a designer and that's his day job, that they're going to be composed. For general drawing help, I really like Control Paint. He has a digital sketching series that each unit is like $10 a thing. I believe it's on Photoshop, but you can use it on different tools. Like you just won't have the same brushes, but the concepts transfer to any digital program. And then lastly, Brad Colbo, hopefully I'm not butchering that. He does tech reviews, but through the lens of someone who creates digital art. So he has lots of reviews of all types of drawing tablets, iPad, Surface, Android tablets, Samsung phones that have the S Pen, all types of different styluses. And he also has courses that he has created for Procreate and Affinity Design. So just lots of information. So if you're trying to invest in equipment, I would look into what he has to say about things. So that's pretty much all I've got. So thanks.